Hello, I am Enrique Quesada, and this is the Judy Leigh Allen Mexico Center podcast from the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. With an economic contraction of almost 10% and more than 135,000 COVID-related deaths, 2020 was, to put it mildly, a tough year for Mexico. The economic and public health challenges the country was already facing were exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic. In 2021, however, federal and local elections will take place, COVID vaccines will become available, and a new U.S. president will be inaugurated. These factors will significantly impact Mexico's economy, politics, public health, and the binational relationship with the United States. I talked to Tony Payan last week to discuss how these events will shape 2021 for Mexico and its government. Tony Payan is the Françoise and Edward de Regin Fellow for Mexico Studies and Director of the Center for the United States and Mexico at the Baker Institute, as well as a professor at the Universidad Autónoma de Ciudad Juárez. Here's our conversation. Tony Payan, Director for the Center for the United States and Mexico, thank you for being on the podcast.
My pleasure.
So 2020 is behind us, and the long-awaited 2021 is finally here. But as we know, so many of the challenges from last year will continue to be challenges, or we will see their consequences this year still. We thought, though, that it would be a good time to, just as we did last year, to kind of go over what the expectations are for this year in Mexican politics, the economy, public health, and of course, the binational relationship with the United States. So let me start by asking, before we go to the expectations, where is Mexico at the outset of 2021, given how the economy performed last year, how the coronavirus pandemic was handled? Last time we talked about this was in the summer, I think. So it's been a while since then.
Yeah. Well, I think the one thing that is in Mexican citizens' foremost in terms of their priorities and their thinking is probably the pandemic. And I remember our conversation in the summer, and even in a panel that we hosted, I think on April 1st, 2020, in which we already were quite critical of the way the Mexican government was handling the pandemic. And here we are in January of 2021, and things haven't changed. In fact, I think our expectations were probably exceeded by the reality. The number of deaths in Mexico, depending on what you're looking at, could be as many as 135,000 this week, as the Mexican government claims, 136,000. And of course, as many as 350,000, because if you look at the number of deaths in excess of the normal number of deaths in 2019, 18, 17, when you look at the curve, you can see the gap between a normal curve of all deaths in the country and the 2020 deaths, which are much higher. It's a line month to month, a much higher line. And so we're talking about 350,000 people possibly. But Mexico is not testing. Mexico is not tracking. Mexico is not investing more in ensuring that its citizens understand what that means and how they can protect themselves. The president doesn't wear a mask. He doesn't talk about it very much. He doesn't give clear instructions. And of course, Mr. López-Gatell, his COVID czar, is also quite confusing when you listen to him. So clearly the country is among the worst. It probably ranks among the top 3 or 4 of the worst countries. We're talking India, Brazil, the US, and Mexico, more or less. So things are worse. And I think this year is going to be even worse, because if you look at the numbers in the beginning of 2021, we're talking about maybe 1,900, 1,300, 1,200 deaths a day. So the numbers are clearly going to explode, at least until probably mid-year, when Mexico will be able to access the vaccines. So things are pretty bad, and I think they're going to be very bad. And I think Mexicans don't know how to behave civilly in public transportation and how to take measures. And of course, many of them can't. I mean, you have to get out to work. You have to use the public transport. You're considered an essential worker. Of course, many of them have lost their jobs, and they have to go out in the streets and try to figure out how to make a living. I mean, the year 2020, I think, ends with an estimated 650,000 jobs lost in the formal sector. And you and I know that Mexico's informal sector is probably around 55, 60% of the economy. So the country is sicker, poorer. And of course, if you go into the political, the president has now undertaken a strong attack on Mexico's autonomous regulatory agencies. So politically, it's getting very complicated, and then the country is going into an election. So 2021 looks like a very complicated year. I don't see how 2021 looks like a better year than 2020 in many, many ways.
So let's talk about the midterm elections first. They will take place on June 6th of this year. And this is the largest election in the country, more so than the one that we had in 2018, which was the largest election up to then. Now the electoral calendars of the different states are all synced. The lower chamber will be completely renewed. Over half of all mayoral posts are up for grabs. And quite significantly, 15 states, almost half of the states, are electing a new governor. And 30 out of 32 states are electing a new state legislature. Can you give us a sense of what is at stake here in terms of political capital for the next 3 years? And do we expect the president's party to do as well as they did in 2018? What about the opposition? How are they doing?
Yeah, there's a number of issues that we have to think about when we talk about the elections in 2021, which are the midterm elections, really. I mean, López Obrador is already on his third year, so this is the midterm election. What are the things that are going to matter? A couple of important things to consider. Number one is, even though Morena swept the elections in 2018, you have to remember that it didn't do as well in 2019, and it didn't do as well in 2020. People often forget that there were important elections in 2019, just a year after the 2018 elections. And of course, the PAN did rather well in Tamaulipas, in Aguascalientes, in the metropolitan area of Puebla, and split Durango state with the PRI. So it was a pretty divided election. I don't think Morena did as well as, certainly not as well as 2018. They, of course, won Baja California. They won in a couple of other states, certainly Veracruz, and they appear to have committed electoral fraud in Puebla. So they won Puebla in a kind of extraordinary election after the governor was killed in a helicopter accident. So it wasn't a very successful year, I don't think. I mean, it was good enough, but not great. And then, of course, in the 2020 elections, in the Hidalgo and Coahuila states elections, they lost. Morena lost. In Hidalgo, the PRI did very well. The PAN did second. Morena came third. And in Coahuila, the PRI swept the elections. So I also have to think about the numbers in 2018. The president got 53% of the vote, but his political party, as such, got 43% of the vote. So there was a 10 percentage point gap between what the president got and what his political party got. Most of the polls today show Morena with preferences around between 28% and 40%, depending on the state. But hardly does it exceed 40%. And that's at the top. I mean, I'm talking about the state of Campeche or some places like that. In most states, Morena is at about 28, 30, 32, 35%. People are looking for options. I think about 2/3 of Mexicans are looking for other options. There's been a disappointing couple of years under the López Obrador administration. And I think when you look at the current polls, most people are still waiting to decide closer to the elections. In fact, when you look at the state-by-state polls, you see that Morena may have 28, 30, 35%. The PAN may have 18, 20%. The PRI may have close to that, 17, 18%. But anywhere between 30 and 40% of all polled citizens still say, I don't know, I haven't made up my mind, I'm waiting, we'll see what happens. So clearly there is an important harvest of votes that are still waiting and that are not insured for either Morena or the opposition. So there's going to be I think, an important fight for those additional votes. That's number one. The other thing that we have to consider is that the coalition among the opposition parties seems to be coming together in about 18 states. So you're going to see that instead of competing with each other for that 65% of the vote, of the opposition vote, the coalition said, well, if the PRI can win in District X, why would the PAN compete? Let's just nominate a single candidate. And then if the PAN is stronger in District Y, why compete against each other? Let's just all support the PAN candidate. So the PAN, PRD, and PRI seem to be going into a kind of coalition. They call it Va por Mexico coalition. And I think that is promising. I mean, we don't know. It's not in every state. It's not in every district. It's not in every mayoral race. But they seem to be understanding that they cannot split the opposition vote, 60 to 65%. They got to somehow get it together into a single coalition, and then maybe have the hopes of introducing a greater political diversity, especially in the House, in Congress, which is important to check the president and the president's power. So in that sense, I think all these things are going to matter. The last thing that I think is going to matter, besides the poor performance of the president, because if you look at the approval of the president, even though it's 60%, and people say, oh, he's got 60% approval, you also have to consider that when you break down his performance into the three major issues, which is security, the pandemic, and the economy, you see that his approval drops to 30, 35, 40%. So clearly people say, well, he's well-intentioned. He's carrying a fight against corruption. He's a good man in principle, but he's not doing very well when it comes to the economy. He's not doing very well when it comes to the pandemic. He's not doing very well when it comes to public safety and security. So the Mexican voter and citizen is turning out to be quite discerning. And the final thing is, in midterm elections, the president's party always loses seats. If that holds, that happened in 97, it happened in 03, it happened in 09, it happened in 12, and it happened in 15. So we'll see if it happens again in 21. So clearly that's going to matter. There's a number of variables that we have to be watching. My hope is that Mexican citizens will exercise the wisdom that they have shown for the last 23 to 25 years, and that they will introduce some checks and balances. And all these variables that I just mentioned point to it, except for one thing, that the president is definitely going to intervene in the elections. He's going to campaign actively for his political party. He's already engaged in a confrontation with the Electoral Institute, which is telling him to stay away, to obey the law and not interfere with the elections, and he's now fighting them. So clearly he's gonna try to influence the way the elections go. Unfortunately for him, because he was quite opposed to that back when Fox and Calderon and Peña were presidents. He criticized them for doing that, and now he's going to be doing that, which I think also shows that he is more inconsistent than not.
So coming back to public health and the situation with the pandemic, as of January 12th, as you said, over 135,000 confirmed deaths, according to the government figures, over 1.5 million confirmed cases total. But now the Pfizer vaccine has been approved for use in Mexico, and last week the government also approved the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, which is cheaper and easier to store and transport than the Pfizer vaccine. The government has a timeline for the vaccine process for different segments of the population. So I'm wondering, how confident can we be about this plan for Mexico, and how is this going to affect the Mexican population in the second half of the year, perhaps, when we see more of the population vaccinated?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not very optimistic about the ability of the López Obrador administration to administer the vaccine. I don't think that they have a plan, and I'll tell you why. Because they seem to be trying to buy different vaccinations from different companies in different countries, but the number of vaccines that have actually come into the country is very low. It's too low. There's 130 million people in the country. And even if you have 1 million vaccines coming in, that's less than 1% of the vaccines that you're going to need. And then, of course, there's already been cases of corruption in which some privileged individuals have been able to buy their way in. The best way to do it, I think, in many, many ways, is to allow the private sector, private hospitals and clinics, and even pharmacies to sell the vaccine and to inject people. And I think most Mexicans would probably resort to that. And that would actually widen the network of distribution and things like that. But the president wants to concentrate it in his hands. He's actually deploying these teams called Servants of the Nation, which is essentially a clientele program, and trying to centralize the administration of the vaccine. I think that it lends itself to a lot of corruption. It lends itself to a lot of inefficiencies, very huge bottlenecks in terms of the distribution, because only certain people affiliated with the government can apply the vaccine and get that vaccine into people's arms. And the number of vaccines is already insufficient. So I'm not very optimistic that the kinds of things that are going on indicate that the government is going to be able to vaccinate all 130 million people in the next few months, and that the distribution is going to be efficient, it's going to be efficacious, it's going to be widespread, and it's going to be essentially providing Mexican citizens with a kind of immunity, herd immunity, I guess, through vaccination that is required to get over this pandemic. So I'm not very optimistic about the country. I'm sorry to say that, but I don't see the signs. I'm trying to read the tea leaves and look forward to the horizon, and I don't see the kinds of things that are going to make this easier.
What does this mean for the economy? All in all, the economy seems to have contracted by approximately 10% this last year. And in 2021, some would hope that with this vaccine rollout, things would improve quite a bit. What's the expectation for the economy in 2021?
Yeah, it depends on who you ask. Again, the Mexican government prefers to have its own numbers. But here's a rundown. I think that when you had the 2008-2009 financial crisis around the world, and Mexico's economy dropped by about 6-7% or so. It was a very steep drop. All of a sudden, the economic contraction was very steep. But by the next year, the economy grew very quickly and recovered all the ground lost, and even a little bit more, to 3% more. So the curve looked more like a V. So it was a V-shaped type of drop and rise. And this year, I think the drop was 10%, like you mentioned. It was very steep. It was very quick in a few months. So the question is it going to be a V-shape type of curve? I don't think so. I think it's going to look like a check mark. It's going to be a steep drop and then a very long, drawn-out recovery. I think the conditions for 2021 are not there for the economy to recover. Number one, the government has not implemented an aggressive stimulus package for the country. They're not subsidizing wages and small businesses and companies and pumping money into the economy and implementing an aggressive counter-cyclical government program to stimulate the economy to create jobs. They're not doing any of that. They're still stuck in this rather odd austerity program that the president engaged in the very beginning. So on the contrary, he's trying to get more money out of the economy and concentrate it into projects. His pharaonic projects like the Dos Bocas refinery and the Mayan train and the Santa Lucia airport, which are in Pemex, saving Pemex, which are sucking in a lot of money, but they're not productive enterprises, or at least not now. I mean, some people doubt that they may be in the future, but at least they're not producing anything now. They're not adding economic activity to the to the national economy. So to me, it seems that nothing that the government is doing signals that the economy will bounce back very quickly. Number two, I think the government is discouraging private and foreign investment. On the contrary, I think a lot of foreign investment has been stopped. It's not flowing. It's stopped on energy. I think there's very little trust that the government can respect contracts by investors in Mexico. There's no faith that the business environment is getting better or will get better in the next few years. So most foreign investors are essentially staying away. They don't really want to engage Mexico, not now. Not that they don't have faith that Mexico is a great market and it may have a future and they may want to go in the future, but not now. And so that flood that you should be incentivizing of foreign investment to come into the country to create economic activity is not happening. And like I said, the countercyclical spending by the government is not going on. So it's pretty miserable. It's a pretty miserable business environment, and I think it's a very poor business environment. And I don't see how the government is going to recover that 10%. Now, it might be that because the drop was so deep and so fast, some of the economic activity after the pandemic is over, and again, we don't know when it will be over. It might take another 6 months. It might take the whole year. Then the economic activity may begin to recover because there's a lot of space for recovery after such a drop, but not soon and not now. The Bank of Mexico, the central bank, I think, argued that it might be about a 5% growth, which may mean a recovery of about half of the loss, but not quite all of it. More pessimistic projections argue that it will take the entire term, the next 4 years practically, for the economy to recover. So we will not see any economic growth in the entire sexennial, the entire term of the López Obrador administration. We're just going to see a flat economy with a growing population and, of course, more poverty conditions. So I'm not very optimistic about the economy either.
So lastly, let's see if you're more optimistic about this part. On the binational relationship, so on January 20th, Joe Biden will be inaugurated as the next president of the United States. And contrary to the nationalistic, inward-looking approach of the Trump administration, we can expect to see President Biden reaching out to his Mexican counterpart much more in a way that expects collaboration. And it seems to me that despite the animosity that President Trump showed towards Mexico, López Obrador appeared to not dislike the approach so much, because then he could also focus inward in his own nationalistic rhetoric and policies. And he didn't have to worry much, I guess, about his relationship with Trump. How do you think this relationship will change under President Biden?
Yeah, that's a mystery. And I think one of the most important questions that we're facing today, there's a number of forums occurring this month to try to figure out what the relationship is going to be under the Biden administration, in the López Obrador administration. I think one of the major questions is the following. Surprisingly to most of us, in Trump, López Obrador found a kind of a kindred spirit, an ally and a friend, not because they had a close relationship, but because they have, like you said, this more isolationist, inward-looking kind of aspiration towards the past type of approach, and their way of conducting themselves and their politics was very similar. They tend to polarize their populations. They tend to attack the press, their critics. They have a certain style of engaging in politics that I think is very similar. And so they found a friend in each other in many ways, mostly because they stayed away from each other, not so much because they came together, joined hands in some kind of project, but because they both believed that let's just stay out of each other's way. Trump threatened Mexico. López Obrador caved in. Collaborated on the immigration issue, and that satisfied Trump. I don't think that's going to be the case with Biden. I think Biden has a much broader view of Latin American relations. I think he's going to make Latin America a priority, and that means Mexico. I think Alejandro Mayorkas at DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, somebody to watch. It's going to be very interesting and important. I think Juan Sebastián González, who will be in charge of Latin American affairs at the National Security Council. A Colombian will be interesting to watch because that means that Biden believes the Colombian model of alliances and partnership with American security is the way to go. And I honestly think that López Obrador is picking a fight with Biden. I think there are many subtle signs that López Obrador wants to pick a fight with Biden. And I wonder why. What does he stand to gain if he picks a fight with Biden and resists Biden? I also think that maybe López Obrador wants to pick a fight with Mr. Biden so that he can use some sort of old nationalism, appeal to some sort of Mexican nationalism to shore up his politics and especially his electoral and his political base, because many of them are anti-American and communist and the Sao Paulo Forum, and they kind of toy with those 1970s ideas, right? And so clearly, he doesn't see in Biden a friend. And I think the only thing that's going to work here is that Biden is not a vengeful man. He's not looking out to pick a fight with anybody. He's more rational. He's more institutional in the way he behaves. And I think he appreciates Mexico's relationship with the United States. So it's not going to blow up thanks to Biden. But I think López Obrador really doesn't like the U.S., doesn't like the White House, and he doesn't like Biden. It's going to be a very difficult relationship, and I don't know if I see it as complicated, but I see calmer waters on the basis of the more institutional behavior that will come from Washington, D.C.
Tony Payan, Director for the Center for the United States and Mexico. Thank you for answering these questions and for this conversation. My pleasure. Thank you, Enrique, and we'll see you next time. That was Tony Payan. That is it for this episode. Thank you for listening to the Judy Lay Allen Mexico Center podcast. Thanks to Lisa Wakata, our program manager, and to Tony Payan, the director of the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Special thanks to Judy Lay Allen for her generous support of the work we do at the center. You can visit our website at bakerinstitute.org/Mexico, where you can find our latest publications. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and the host, and do not necessarily reflect those of the center. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can email us at usmexicocenter@rice.edu. We would love to hear from you. Mexico Centered is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Radio Public, and Spotify. You can subscribe through your favorite podcast app to receive all of our new episodes directly on your phone. I am Enrique Quesada. Stay safe, wear a mask, and I will see you next time.